Welcome, everyone, to a special little episode of Jams and Tea. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. You may have noticed that we've talked about video games in our couple of now segments that we've done in an effort to talk more about new artistic mediums that we do also consume and love. Not the first time we put up gaming content on this channel, and not the last, but it is special because today we're coming at you with a tier list for the entire franchise of Legend of Zelda, kind of coinciding with the amazing monolithic release of the new Tears of the Kingdom, because that's, the biggest thing that'll happen in video gaming this year, bar none, pretty much. So we three Legend of Zelda fans, experts, aficionados have come together to give you the definitive takes, the objective 100% correct takes on ranking these games. You can't question it. It's absolute. Our word is law, carved into stone.
Just as a sort of framework for this, we're only operating in like mainline series titles. So that means no Four Swords, no Hyrule Warriors,
no Link's crossbow training.
No Link's crossbow training, no Zelda's Adventure or CDI games. Just the cream of the crap here. And also, this actually isn't something I mentioned to my compatriots, but I think we can all agree that none of these games really fit in the D tier in terms of like video games overall.
Yeah, this is relative for this franchise.
Yeah,
I think maybe one does for me, but maybe one or two. Close.
Yeah, I have some in mind, but we'll get there when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
True enough. So yeah, these are set out in order of release here. So unless anyone has any objections, let's just jump right into it.
I have a quick question that may not be, we can edit it out. It's just for me. How are we, because I imagine that we're not all going to agree. You're operating the tier list. So we're all contributing and then we have like a consensus, or do we each have like a pin, so to speak? How does that work?
I was basically thinking consensus. Like,
okay, cool.
It'll work a little bit like the Trump and Obama tier lists, where they're just like
where we find the best compromise of the three, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
Yeah, that is an important note.
I have like ratings for all of these. You guys have ratings for all of these?
I do.
Cool.
Most of them, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, we start off with The Legend of Zelda, released
the one that started them all.
Released in 1986 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Revolutionary, inarguably,
groundbreaking,
and can't take away from that if I tried.
Console launch title,
yeah,
for that system, and obviously just sort of lived for the entire cycle of that console. Holds up pretty well. I think if we were doing a tier list of all of the NES games, it would rank pretty highly for me among
that's like an easy A tier NES game.
The only things I'm confident from Nintendo that are better than it on that console would be like Super Mario Brothers 1 and 3, and then maybe like Castlevania or Castlevania 3. Like there might be a couple others, but not many. And so I think from that respect, it holds up really well. But I think there's a good reason why the sequel doesn't really follow in its footsteps, and that it would take like a couple more tries to find the 2D top-down formula for Zelda.
I don't enjoy playing this game in the slightest.
That's understandable, frankly.
Personally, I would put it in the C tier, but I think with respect to the Nintendo Entertainment System and sort of the franchise in general, it sounds like a healthy B.
I actually think C's right.
Okay. Yeah.
I think like a compromise between theirs, but I would probably gravitate a bit more towards C, specifically because the Zelda formula, which is, pretty well laid out in this game, because obviously any attempt to even go back to it is so close to the chest when it comes to its overarching ideas. But the sad fact of the matter is that the original Legend of Zelda has basically been soft rebooted like 8 different times at this point, and they are all arguably at least as good, if not probably a little bit better, bare minimum.
I think it's a unique experience among these games, but it doesn't really captivate. It doesn't really capture that sword play, shield, the kind of diverse array of tools. It's got the building blocks of what this would be, but it's a very projectile oriented game. And yeah, it's just something that's been bested time and time again in this franchise. And then I think also by games like The Binding of Isaac, which take its core elements and then in a modern context just expand it so thoroughly. To me, it's an enjoyable game, but it's not one that I revisit with any sort of frequency. But neither are most NES games, frankly.
It's kind of a transitional moment for the idea of games as a medium, really, because it's the midway point between arcadey and exploratory, and it's kind of in a compromised state as both of those things, and that it's not the fulfillment of the ideal arcade level design experience, and it's not the fulfillment of the exploratory game experience either. So it's a bit awkward in that respect.
I think the exploration is what holds up and is something that I think a lot about when we talk about the 2 most recent Nintendo Switch entries, is how they resemble that spirit of adventure. One of the things that I think does hold up about this game is just that you go from screen to screen to screen, and it's just kind of discovery. Even if you've played it before, there's just it's tough to describe. It just doesn't have like these huge maps like you might be used to in video games where you can kind of navigate by waypoints. So you really have to kind of just learn by experience, which is something that really gives you that sense of adventure.
To sort of mirror what Jake was saying, this franchise has been like soft rebooted so many times, and the last one being Breath of the Wild, because that's I mean, if you want to squint your eyes a little bit, that's kind of a remake of this very first title.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting to trace the design ethos to where they've gone through all these iterations and then sort of ended up at the same place, only with all of the the powers of modern design. But yeah, I think healthy C tier within the grand scope of things is fair.
It's about like a 6.5 out of 10 for me. That extra half just for like its place in history. There's one thing to note, obviously, just a name that runs through these early games all the way through the 90s is Koji Kondo. I do think that the music and the themes for this, I mean, every classic Zelda theme is born here. It's kind of like Star Wars in that way. It's like, just kind of basic elemental. There are things that would be improved upon, but like, damn, the tunes really kick still.
Yeah,
absolutely do.
Zelda 2, Adventures of Lincoln.
I was the black sheep of the family.
Yeah, and you earned it, Chief. You're not fun. You're not.
I gotta confess. I'm a bit of an Adventures of Link defender. This is I enjoy playing this game about as much as I enjoy playing the first one, but I find everything about its mechanics to be clumsier, and yet the actual like movement and fluidity of the game, like the actual game feel, I think is way less stiff and like way more, as a combat system, I find it more intriguing. It's not, it's not finessed. It's not like tight and you need something like this to be, which is why it's so sinfully difficult. But like, I can at least go into this game with the context of being like, this is different from a normal Zelda thing. It has iconography I recognize, but I can treat it as its own thing. And I would argue that I would put it in the same tier, even though it's not quite a better video game. Like I would give it an apprehensive 6. Like the first is better, but if you put an NES in front of me, I really would. 50% chance I pick either one. Don't know.
Just a little bit of context for anybody that maybe hasn't played Zelda 2. It's a completely different style of game. It's more of like a side-scrolling action game akin to Castlevania, kinda, but where you're going through levels from side to side as opposed to the top-down dungeon crawling experience of the original. And I think it's kind of interesting how that echoes Mario 2, like either the Lost Levels or the Doki Doki Panic, how they clearly in that early console era didn't quite grasp or latch on to the idea of like, okay, this is what a Mario game is, and it starts on 1-1 and blah, 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 blah. They wanted to give their players a new experience that was more challenging. It's got much more of a Japanese game design sensibility and just like absolutely crash and burn in America. And then they both kind of went back to the drawing board with 3 and delivered, you know, the kind of polished, complete version of what the games would go on to become. Between the two, I think Mario's a little bit more complete from the start, whereas Zelda's still figuring these things out. It's an interesting experiment. I don't enjoy playing this game. I've played it to completion once. I'll never touch it again. It's like a 4 out of 10. I think it's, D tier's right. It's not horrible, but it's not good.
It's a game that I would love to see remade. Like, I would be really curious as to what angle they would take with that.
I find it telling that you mentioned Mario 2, because when I think of Zelda 2, my mind always goes to Simon's Quest.
Yeah, I was literally thinking of the Castlevania first 3 games.
It's a lot like Simon's Quest in the sense that there are a lot of interesting ideas here that are worth expounding upon in later titles, and could have even worked in the game specifically. But like, I don't know about you all, but there is personally nothing I find more viscerally like offensive when playing a game than the feeling of like being stuck on a puzzle or just like a progression gate or whatever, and then just giving up and looking it up, and then once you look it up and see the solution, you go, how in the fuck was I ever supposed to put that together?
This one's really got an intuitiveness problem,
and
that's a characteristic.
Hate it.
That's a characteristic of the next 2 Zelda games, both of which I adore. And I'll have some more thoughts, especially once we get into kind of more of the handheld stuff, why I think that works in some cases and doesn't in others. Like in Simon's Quest, it's like they're giving you bad information. Characters will give you incorrect information, and it's just infuriating. And I do think that there's a bit of that here too, where it's, I think part of that's trying to like pad out the experience of these very short, early 8-bit home console games that are all like, you know, half a megabyte in size a piece.
And you know, there's so much discourse about games being $70 now, and yes, obviously that's a lot of money, but I mean, games have been around the $60 to $80 range since this period in gaming's history. So it makes sense that they would want to, you know, buffet that, just the amount of playtime that you're getting as much as possible, because usually that was the game you're getting for at least the year. So it makes sense there, but there's also like a sort of arcadey kind of we want your quarters design that infects some of these early titles. That's just
for sure
utterly intolerable. I'm gonna keep it in the D tier. I'm gonna have to overrule.
That's fair.
This is where this is gonna get really interesting.
This is my baby here.
1993's The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Now, look, I don't think anybody here is going to sit here and try to say that this is anything less than a great game.
Very true.
It's just, and it's a Super Nintendo game. It surely is that. I will say easily the best Zelda entry thus far. I think I personally,
no question,
would put this in the B tier, and that would be as low as I'm willing to go. So we can always just move that up once the conversation progresses. But there is still that lingering element of how was I ever supposed to figure out how to go to this place? What's better about it here? And this was something that the first game was much better about than Zelda 2. What A Link to the Past is even better at than the first one is sort of engendering this desire to explore. in the player. And ultimately, I think, especially now, you should never design a game with this in mind. But ultimately, just out of the desire for exploration, you are going to eventually hit at the thing that you want, that you need to do to get to the next stage. And it's a sort of like stopped clock is right twice a day approach to progression gating that I don't care for at all. And I find a lot of these, and no doubt, skill issue, but I find a lot of the encounters, particularly the boss encounters in this game, to just like the most fuck off like ever.
Yeah.
The fucking bubble worm dude that pushes you off the stage and you have to go back
Oh,
up the stage.
Yeah, the
Literally
that
shut up,
fucking-
Nintendo. Literally shut up.
that gets a reprise in the next game, which obviously, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it. Jake, you want to go? I have or Morgan, if you're still going, I didn't even mean to.
But yeah, I just the combat feels like really good for a game of its time. Just the sort of material tactileness of it is like really impressive for a Super Nintendo game. I think really like the only one better than it in this regard is probably Super Castlevania 4. And even then that's debatable. Yeah, it's just the swish of the sword, the eight-way movement. It all comes together in really not just technologically impressive ways, but ways that are really fun to play. And again, it really engenders exploration in better ways than any of the games before it. And I also hate it. So great game. I've played it all the way to completion. This is the first one of these that I've actually completed, just because the first two are old and ugly. And A Link to the Past is, it's a monument in this franchise, and it was certainly worth the playthrough, but I don't think it's one I'm going to be returning to for. Well, I mean, A Link Between Worlds is right there, so
that's kind of the elephant in the room, and it also is one thing that I hinge on a lot when talking about this game, in that to some degree this is the point at which the Zelda games become, I think, inarguably essential basically from here on out if you want to familiarize and acquaint yourself with this franchise in any legitimate capacity, just because those first two games, they are so entrenched in the early days of game design that they still feel like they haven't found their footing yet. This one is easily the most confident, the most aesthetically accomplished. Like, everything about the visual and musical upgrades of this is amazing and will carry over into the franchise forever, basically. It's, I mean, again, the musical, just like Jesus Christ, the music in this game.
He was cooking.
The actual, he was, and
even
again,
just like
feel of it
the
all.
menu music when you're selecting your save file and you get that very
you will stay like I just like the music that plays like when you talk to like Sahasrara or whatever, like when you like the mystical stuff that'll play. It is I. It's like every motif is fantastic, and it is very satisfying to play. There is, as Morgan said, kind of still some trouble with that intuitive game design issues that, again, I feel like Morgan and I maybe very specifically are a little bit less prone to forgive, just because it feels like we grew up maybe like it's kind of that we have like the perfect age difference to have a slightly different perspective on this aspect of game design, Zach, because I feel like we were born right as intuitiveness and gameplay was like a priority for everything that we grew up with. And here it's just a little bit clumsier, and that has its own appeal, but it also has to do with the fact that, again, I played things like Minish Cap or and again, Link Between Worlds 2 was something that I completed in its entirety way before I completed this. And it suffers the most maybe from remake syndrome, where there is another version of this game technically that is just kind of, at least in my opinion, empirically better. But I again, this is something that you want to play for the novelty of it, and you will it depends on your proclivities as a player. but it's an essential game, but it's not exactly one that I'm going to go back to have like an optimal amount of fun with.
I'm gonna crank the wheel hard the other way here. This is a hard S, 10 out of 10, and my favorite Zelda
Go
game.
for it.
The
Ooh,
reason
whew.
being,
Talk your shit, King. Let your nuts hang.
There's like a million ways that we could assess what the Zelda experience is, or what the motifs are, what the mechanics are, how different games represent benchmarks at this point, this point, this point, this point. What this one is to me, more than any of the Zelda convention stuff, is one of the best action games ever made. It's just a game like, and this is kind of something that I think comes from the age difference of like growing up with this game versus growing up with later iterations. This is where the Zelda template, especially of the 2D top-down games, was born. Every 2D top-down game that we will talk about after this point on some level is just a link to the past with new accoutrements, polish, quality of life improvements, different maps, different bosses, different aesthetics, etc. And so it becomes a measure of preference, or how you evaluate the execution of the story of the dungeons, blah blah blah. And I totally get the preference of the other titles for their adventure properties, for what it is like to roll through that version of Hyrule, or to climb a mountain, or to go inside of a dungeon. But to me, this is the one where I've revisited it the most times, and just, you can take every boss fight and reduce it to its absolute minimum number of steps and execute it perfectly with total precision. I've played it probably more times on the Game Boy Advance kind of light remake that came with 4 swords. And I do think that that version of it is a little bit inferior. I think that it works better when you play it as the Super Nintendo game, because it has the larger screen, which allows for, it's kind of a twofold thing. It makes it a little easier and a little harder, because the whole thing that kind of captivates me about the 2D top-down Zelda games, with this and its Game Boy follow-up being the two most exciting versions for me, is that there's a kind of chess match that you play when you walk onto a screen where you're like, okay, there's 5 enemies, they're laid out this way, this is what they're going to start doing when I get into the room, what items do I need to equip, and how do I need to sequence from here to here to here to here to here without taking any damage. And you can get really fast at that and really good at that in a way that I think that later entries, either because of technological limitations of like draw distance and loading 3D things, that's just not quite that crisp and twitchy and quick to be the kind of satisfying action game experience. This is absolutely like pinnacle SNES shit for me. But at the same time,
it's up there with like Super Metroid for me.
Yeah, I would say this, Super Metroid, Yoshi's Island, and then like Final Fantasy VI, right? The SNES was really like the JRPG console in many respects, but this is kind of the peak of what it could do. And I think Morgan already said this quite well, is like this in Super Castlevania with the kind of tactile, responsive combat. I would lobby hard for this to be an A at the minimum, because just
I think that's a solid
S1.
compromise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally, it's one of those, like I said, once it becomes the template, not just Link between worlds, but when you play Minish Cap, or when you play any of these other 2D games, you can kind of find little niches and things that, make you think that that's the better expression of the formula. So I totally kind of get not having that same special place. There's something really unique, and Morgan touched on this too, where the game would be the game that you got for the year. And back in the day, whether it was video games or music CDs that you bought, there was kind of a quality of like, I own 6 video games and I've played them all 20 times because I don't have 30 video games, right? And I think from that point, you can kind of get into what really makes all these Zelda entries shine from here all the way up until the modern day, is that they put so much fucking care into how they are made, that you can do that and find so much joy and worth in playing them over and over and over again. or just exploring maps almost aimlessly. If you're a little kid, you don't really get what the clues are. There's just a certain fun to traversing in the world that I think the franchise has never really lost, and I admire that about it. It's one of the things that draws me to it. Although when we get into the next game, which is Link's Awakening, it becomes a more concise package, doesn't it? It's much more coiled and directed, which I think is a great strength of that title.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, looking at it, just all of these laid out, this is more or less that, regardless of 2D, 3D, or top down or what have you, this is the template under which these games would operate until Breath of the Wild, which is, exploration, progression gate, dungeon, exploration, progression gate, etc.
Maybe a touch of non-linearity here or there, something where you could switch the sequence on 2 dungeons, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, really, that kind of thing depends on the title, but this is more or less the thing that we would be locked into for the next nearly 30 years.
I look at one and I see one that jumps out as a different, and it still has all these aspects that you're talking about, but just maybe puts a little bit more of the emphasis onto side quests and the kind of cyclical nature. I'm talking about Majora's Mask, where you still have all of those elements, but it's a little bit less of a linear and it's a little bit more of a coil.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of that's the one spoiler in all of this, and in more ways than one, but a bridge to cross when we get to it.
Indeed.
So yeah, solid A tier for A Link to the Past. Certainly can't begrudge that at all. Next up, we have The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening for the Game Boy and subsequently the Game Boy Color. I'm
just
also sort of
including this like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm also sort of including the remake in this, which is the version that I have the most experience with. But aside from like the whack ass dungeon maker that they included, pretty much the same game with a facelift. So this will be a hard A tier for myself personally. It's such an interesting game considering the 3 that came before it, where there's no princess, there's no Ganondorf, there's no Triforce, there's Link has washed ashore on this island, and these people are like, you gotta wake the windfish with some horns, and you're like
what the hell is a windfish?
Yeah, I'm like, all right, well, first of all, that's an egg. That is neither the wind nor a fish. But okay.
I really like right there. This is kind of the first game where music is brought to the forefront of the plot of a Zelda game. The ocarina, which is called a flute in the English translation of Link to the Past, is in Link to the Past. But this is the game where it's like you get the ocarina and you learn multiple songs on it, and you're collecting up all these instruments. And I think that becomes such an important motif through these games, and I think that's something that just jumps out right away here.
Yeah, obviously there's all the Mario character inclusions, and chain chomps and your bullet bills and your whatnots. And the entire game, and this is not the last time we would see this idea, has a sort of fever dreamy feeling to it, where it very much feels like you're playing a sort of a Link to the Past style game, but everything is kind of, it's a bit like somebody went into a Zelda game and just put everything 3 inches to the left of where it was the last time you found it, to put up a sort of metaphor comparison on it.
Do you guys know that did you see the tweet from the Twin Peaks writer Mark Frost, that he actually contributed to the writing of this game? Like Nintendo, while writing Link's Awakening, consulted Twin Peaks co-writer Mark Frost, and so it's like literally legit.
Everything in my life makes sense now. That's literally like the white picket fence around that house just looks like fucking blue velvet. I'm seeing it.
Yeah, it's like seeing the fucking Matrix code. And I think there's a wry sense of humor that runs through the earlier games that just kind of comes off a little bit better here, because there's just a strangeness to this game. It just feels displaced, and it actually kind of creates a greater sense of urgency. Like, the exploration is still there, but you really want to like burn through that game and get to the dungeons, get off the island a little bit. It creates this kind of that to start, but then I think over time you kind of get the opposite. You have that Wizard of Oz effect.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you feel like if Link could speak, he would be constantly saying like, "No, you don't. Yeah, I have to get out of here,
right,
guys.
right.
I, you're being very nice, but I have to go. This is not my home." But yeah, it's super rewarding experience overall. If you're a Zelda fan and like me, when the remake came out, you hadn't familiarized yourself with this one at all, I cannot heartily recommend enough either picking up this, not picking up, but like you just looking into emulating or on the Switch Online thing for doing this on the Game Boy version of it, or for the remake, because it's mild spoiler alert, is my second favorite of the 2D top-down titles, and I think an essential point in the progression of this franchise.
I want to note something quickly here, because we've talked a little bit about how in the first three titles there's this characteristic of puzzles that are difficult to solve, and I think this game, one, has less of that. The puzzles are a little bit more streamlined. In fact, I think about everything about this game in the Game Boy version is a little easier. You've got smaller screens with fewer enemies. All the sprite models are a little bit bigger, so it's easier to hit things. The combat's a little spammier. You've got more powerful weapons, like your boomerang's just like a kill shot on everything in this game. And so it's easier and more accessible than Link to the Past was. When it comes to those puzzles, there are still a few where you're like, how the fuck is a 6-year-old supposed to figure that out? And I think the mentality is this. It's that you and me and Jake would all have our Game Boys. We'd be playing the game, whatever. Maybe we'd be playing it together. Maybe we'd be at recess at some later point. And you guys would be like, hey, did you know that if you do the Pegasus boots into this tree, a fucking shell pops out? And you'd be like, what? No way. And you pop on your Game Boy and then you just try it. And it's about that kind of collaborative experience they were always trying to build with the Game Boys and the Link cables. This Link's Awakening was the game that had or DX for the Game Boy Color, had that Game Boy camera gimmick shit. And so it has like this like whole photo side quest thing. There were all these like weird gimmicky things that Nintendo would do to try to like integrate the hardware and the software. But I think that's where some of that design mentality was coming from, was trying to foster a sense of discovery that relied on communal playing and not just single player, whatever.
Yeah, which is something that a lot of these games had engendered to begin with. Just not in the sense of, it's more in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to go home and try that tonight. Instead of, I can just whip this out at the recess and do that.
Before they were banned because of Pokemon.
Yes.
Also, with these two games in particular, I gotta shout this franchise for having birthed Pokemon. In essence, it's just like a little bit of that.
No, yeah,
a little bit of Dragon Quest.
I have not. I've played like one Pokemon game, and I was like, I'm too old for this. With all due respect, because I literally was like 20 years old the first time I played a Pokemon game, and I was like, I missed the window.
Yeah.
But I look at this game, and then I look at like Blue or Red, and I'm like, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like stealthily influential in so many interesting ways. Yeah, it is an excellent title, my favorite of these thus far.
It's a rock solid 9 for me. 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I would agree.
I was actually kind of worried because I didn't know this. I feel like because of its sort of peripheral status and the way it doesn't really adopt many Zelda tropes, that some people might see it as like lesser Zelda, or just kind of be like, oh yeah, it's that one Game Boy game. Because I didn't know how you two really felt about it, so I was going to be like, yeah, this is also probably my favorite Zelda game so far, and I haven't even played the remake yet. I just think that it takes advantage of the fact, like, like I'm a handheld person. Like if something's going to take advantage of being accessible and streamlined on a handheld, which this more or less does in every single way, it just stealthily optimizes everything that I like about Link to the Past and then puts it into a package that I think just works a little bit more. So I would easily put this in the A tier as well. Complete unified agreement from all of us.
I think having just recently replayed it, it's an immaculate front to back structured game where you're basically going through this elaborately coiled labyrinth of this tiny little map of the island, but you feel like you maximize every pixel of it. I love the influence that it seems to have had on games like Undertale in their kind of wry sense of humor and strangeness, and even the game design and characters to a certain extent. I do think the combat's a little less gratifying. It's just kind of easier, so to speak. But God, I fucking love a game that you can pop on and just clear in 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah, and that's another thing I want to say about this. The fact that the map of Koholint Island is smaller is almost certainly just down to technical limitations, but I really appreciate how much smaller it is than the Hyrule of A Link to the Past.
For sure.
Frankly, I do not. There is a reason that eventually they put in like a mild fast travel mechanic in A Link to the Past, because I'm tired of running around this map.
There's one in this game too, and it's like comically useless. You might use it like 2 times. You can use the ocarina to teleport around, and you use that a little more. But like the fast travel points they have in Link's Awakening are like, what? What is this?
Like,
who uses these?
Why do I need to anyway?
Fucking like a quarter of the map is some log ride side quest minigame thing.
Yeah. I think this game would be a 10 for me if it weren't for the fucking trading quest. Like, why would you? I'm okay.
You know what? Yeah, you're right.
It adds a lot of like flavor and character going around and doing it, but it's not something that you're going to be able to like solve the first time. You're probably going to have to look that up.
Yeah, I don't really mind. I don't really mind it either. It's also just like, this is a little too long, and I would like to be on to the next dungeon. Thank you.
Maybe could use a little bit more like variation or like things happening along the way. I have to say, so the game has that sense of urgency that it engenders because you feel like there's this wrongness to it, and then as it goes along, you do get to know these characters in this world. And I don't want to spoil this game for anybody that hasn't played it, but I do think the ending of this game is what takes it from like great 2D top-down Zelda game to one of the best of the entire Game Boy catalog.
Totally.
It is intensely emotional and sweet, and it just lingers, bittersweet really, and it just lingers for days and days after you've played it. Once you've completed it, you just feel
it engenders an existential kind of awe in you, where you're like, if this is your first game as a kid, playing this would be like, it's one of your first profound experiences with the medium. You're just like, I've
rarely played a game that has a deeper understanding of what it means to want to start a game and get through it and play it and progress, and then to get to the end and not want it to be over and have to say goodbye to these characters and worlds that you've really gotten to know. And I think one of the reasons why this isn't quite over the next 2 games that we're going to talk about for me is because I think they just do the character better. They just have more character, more world for you to get to attach to, versus this, like, it's kind of Marin, the girl, and then there's like these other flavorful, funny little side characters, but they're not as deep, and you don't have as much dimension with them. And I think that that's the direction that this franchise would ultimately take after this game, and just get better and better at as they went along with it.
Yeah, so healthy A tier, rare consensus from all of us, basically. So next we have 1998's landmark, revolutionary,
the big one,
Super Mario 64 2.0 Sword Edition.
Yeah, but this time with lizard men.
And you can't jump.
Cannot jump.
And a much better color scheme.
Yes, a Zelda Ocarina of Time for Nintendo 64. So a little bit of context. I can't remember exactly, but it was either this or the very first Halo were the first games that I ever played as just, I mean, barely large enough to hold the controller. Uh, Actually, the only version I've actually never played the Nintendo 64 version of this, even though we have a 64. Um, I have the version of this that came with, I think, a pre-order of Wind Waker on the GameCube.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So I've only played this on the GameCube and the 3DS.
Yeah, GameCube game is basically an identical port. Basically no difference, except you get to play it with a GameCube controller instead of a three-handle fucking N64
I
controller.
played it on I played it on the Wii Virtual Console, and I used the Nintendo 64 like attachment to that, so that I got to play it with a better controller.
Oh my.
Oh my. Yeah. Again, pretty empirically a great game.
Yep.
I prefer the 3DS version, just for a
I do as
variety
well.
of quality of life improvements.
Yeah.
And just, I just think it looks nicer.
Yeah, visuals are both more and less important than I think the modern gaming climate gives them credit for, in that I think they matter a whole lot to the experience, but at the same time, people are just like, graphical fidelity, blah. This has nothing to do with fidelity. The stylization is just better.
I have strong opinions about the remake aesthetic changes, but to Majora's Mask. Here in this game, the fidelity is almost 1-to-1. Like, if you're really noticing aesthetic differences, if you're a person who's protective of the N64 game and you're dissing on the remake, I mean, and you're like, the differences in the 3DS version, you're being a weak. They're really minor.
Yeah.
And almost all of them improve the experience. Something that is like in Link's Awakening, you have 2 item slots. And so you're constantly rotating it. Like sometimes you rotate out the sword because you need your Pegasus boots dash and the Rock's feather to jump. That's something that comes up in these N64 games. You have more item slots, but you have most infamously the water temple in this game, where you're fucking having to go into the menu, put on the boots, equip the boots, blah, blah, blah. Then you go down, go to the menu, take off the boots, blah, blah, blah. And in the 3DS version, because you have the 2 screens, you just eliminate all of that bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that I guess I'll say vis-a-vis Ocarina, the 3D, I don't really have much of a difference. For me, the 64 and 3DS versions are both like equally great. I think that this does such a fucking ingenious job of taking the Zelda formula established by Link to the Past and making it into a 3D game that almost feels like it incorporates elements of the Metroidvania, the kind of progression blocks that we've been talking about, orienting it around that Ocarina. And then I think narratively, while Link's Awakening is an excellent story, this takes everything to the next level in terms of characterization, themes. The basic story of this game is like elementally Miyazaki level perfect to me. And it's, the usage of time and age and loss and what it means to die and what it means to be born. All of these things packed into something that I think you can pick up and play when you're, too small to hold the controller, and maybe not get all the way through, but get into a little ways, get into those little tutorial
get to Jabu Jabu's belly and then wait 5 years to when you can actually, and then when you're smart.
Mine was literally like a fucking Phantom Ganon in the forest.
Yeah, the forest temple.
I was just like, will you turn this music off? I love it now, but as a kid, when it was I was like, shut up.
My friend and I used to have like competitions to basically see how quickly we could get to the time skip. Like, so it'd just be like, how quickly can you get to Goma inside the fucking Deku tree and all this different stuff. There's so many memories of playing this game. I kind of underrated it for a while because I'm such a big fan of its follow-up. And I think that sometimes a big criticism of mine is that these games can be formulaic, and this is like a template game that the formula is based on for the 3D side. But revisiting it, and it was the 3DS version that I was revisiting, just really left a strong impression on me with the characters, with the use of music, and again, the idea of what it means to say goodbye to characters. Only in this game, it's not about like the kind of dreamy wistfulness. It's about you have to say goodbye to them because of Ganon's path of destruction.
The literal end of the goddamn world.
Which is, in many ways, directly your responsibility as the character of Link in this game and Zelda. And so there's a lot of like the weight of being a hero and the weight of responsibility that I think the next game gets even better, but is just superb here and just takes the emotional experience. It's like Final Fantasy VII. It's that same like, hey, we really ratcheted this end of it up.
Something else I underrated for a very long time, but only kind of grew to realize its elemental simplicity is its genius.
Just fucking Gyarados desert music.
Koji Kondo, fucking
this, like,
Jesus.
The opening title screen where you're on Epona and coming. Oh man, fuck.
Like the other day, I found an orchestral performance of a number of songs from this franchise. It's like a 15-minute video, and they sort of collage them all together. And when it hit the title screen theme of this game, I had to go to the bathroom and cry for 20 minutes.
It's so potent. It's you know?
Yeah. And it was like for reasons that I cannot explain. I am neither sad nor happy crying. I am just listening to the sound of this. And
this game
and like
deepens my appreciation of Princess Mononoke, and Princess Mononoke deepens my appreciation of this game. I feel like they're very closely connected in many respects, in my brain anyway.
It also maintains the sense of like tight satisfaction that you got in the 2D top-down formula with Link to the Past, where the sword swishes feel really good. Like here, it feels weighty, like the actual gameplay, and the Z targeting system is
literally
not
changed
perfect,
games.
But it
changed games. Like it invented how swordplay works in 3D, and it's still how From Software games work to this day.
This is Dark Souls.
Like 97% of the time it works the way I want it to. And yeah, it's a little annoying that 3% of the time, but at the same time, it's like, this doesn't impact me significantly enough to take it down. And it also kind of carries over the sense of accessibility from like just ramping it up each time, where it feels like it still does have one or two moments where you're just kind of like, all right, maybe this being in a pre-video game guide era is a little bit unfair, but those problems that I have with Link to the Past, where it feels like, how was I supposed to know to do this, are mostly gone. Like maybe one or two instances of that, but nothing significant.
You have more robust worlds and maps, and like characters are giving you hints. They're doing a better job of kind of laying the track for you to follow. I do think one of the limitations of it is that it's linear, but the story is so strong and so engaging that you just kind of want to plug through it and progress from dungeon to dungeon to dungeon. There is a certain like quaintness now when you're running or riding Epona across that empty ass fucking Hyrule field. There's nothing there. When you play a modern game and go back to that, although when you played that in 1998, it fucking exploded your brain. So there's a certain level of like, you have to kind of take yourself back to this time to wrap your head around the conventions. But I think with the limitations that they had in mind, this shit kicks. Like, it's really fun. There's a lot of creative combat stuff that you can do with like Deku 6 or the big whacking hammer thing, where you can take that Ganon fight down to like 2, 3, 4 hits, stuff like that. There was some. Oh, I just wanted to call out, like, I think for 3D games, I don't really know that the temple designs ever really peaked past this one for me. I am of the opinion that the water temple, while it is annoying in many respects. And the 3DS version adds a couple different things, including some camera angles and the UI that we've already talked about to make it a little bit less unbearable. The design of that is fucking genius to me.
Yeah, no,
I
don't
love
think
that
that is the Zelda dungeon.
And like the Shadow Temple, like the Fire Temple, the Fire Temple is the one that's annoying. Sorry, that's the one because it's just so big and expansive, and like enemies respawn and shit. But there's just like, I don't know. I love how themed they are and how distinct they all feel and how memorable.
Forest Temple, Shadow Temple, immaculate atmosphere. Just like
those two in particular.
Those two in
particular are like proto Luigi's Mansion. Like it's just
and I love that
killer
shit.
Stuff.
There's some cool horror things in this game. You know, you wouldn't compare it to a Silent Hill 2, but just going through
motherfucker. Those things are scary.
Hyrule Castle Town after the time switch, and like all the people that you saw are now like zombies and dead, and the music's all fucked up. And you're like, what the hell?
And just like this, the sky is wrong.
Yeah,
it's like
it's like I was playing Mario Kart 10 minutes ago, and now I'm looking at this charred carcass.
Like, oh shit!
I don't feel good.
I need to fix this.
This is another
exactly.
This is another like rock solid 9 for me. I would put it right next to Link's Awakening, basically in the A tier.
Yeah, I would. I'm gonna put it between these two. I like it a little more than A Link to the Past and a little less than Link's Awakening. This is probably more like an 8.5 for me, because there are a small couple things, and like I fuck Jabu Jabu's belly, fuck the Fire Temple, just give me Epona. I don't want to have to do this stupid ass Lon Lon Ranch side quest. I hate this. Just let me play the game. Let me get across this big stupid ass field faster without having to do a dumbass quest.
I think there's an interesting note there, because I think side questing in Zelda games is fun and rich, and it really speaks to what the next game is all about. But in Ocarina, it's so focused on that end point that anything side quest feels extra, like you could lose it and the game would flow better.
That classic Ludo narrative dissonance,
baby.
Yeah, good video game. Now we have 2000s Majora's Mask, and I just
yep,
that's right. That's correct.
I have a strong preference for the 3DS version, both for some aesthetic changes and some quality of life changes. I remember when I first played this game, I pretty much did mainline it through the 4 main dungeons and to the end, and I was like, that was really cool and different and all, but like I don't really understand what all the hubbub is about. And I've still actually never sat down and done like every single side quest and gotten all the masks and all that, but like I know all the stuff at this point, as well as just having done more of that in the last couple of playthroughs that I put in. And like this game is so fucking galaxy brain genius, incredible. Like
this is one of my favorite archetypes in art, is when you have something that is like almost the essential perfect, the recipe, the formula, the model, the template, the blueprint, which I think is true of Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, is when you take that and then instead of duplicating it, doing it a second time, doing it again but bigger, you invert it. You make it complicated. You ask challenging questions.
Computer to Kid A.
Great example. So the way that Ocarina ends, Zelda sends you back into the past. You have this whole thing where you've been an adult and a kid, and it's been split up, and you get sent back. And this whole game explores what it really means to even this character in this place, to have these memories of, you know, heroism and the quote unquote the Legend of Zelda, and to live in the shadow of that. And then obviously everything exploring through the kind of apocalyptic cyclical nature of the story, where you're repeatedly going back in time and back in time and back in time. It's just such a profoundly challenging set of emotional ideas where every single element of this game just rings out as incredibly emotional to me, to the point where like I take breaks when I play this game. Unlike every other Zelda game, which I play like a demon, like there's certain quest lines in this game where I'm like, all right, I've gotten through the 3-day cycle. I'm putting this away, and I will see you in a couple of days. Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Bye.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everything I love about the Nier video game series is present here. How it's just about challenging certain ideas. And I also love the reuse of the Majora's, or not Majora's, but the reuse of the Ocarina of Time assets. Like we were just talking about the Epona quest. You go to Lon Lon Ranch, and in the child timeline, there's one girl, and in the adult timeline, there's another girl. And in Majora's Mask, those two models are still used, but now they're sisters. And so it has that kind of Wizard of Oz quality of like, hey, I know you, but you're different now. Or Mulholland Drive, if you want to like go with it.
Yeah. It's reminds me of, and I think Tears of the Kingdom in this are kindred spirits. Are kindred spirits in a lot of ways. Jumping ahead a little bit, not so much tonally, but like in terms of like the tweet I saw about Tears of the Kingdom that stayed with me in my time with that game was like, this is what a developer can do when they don't have to build everything from the ground up, which is just basically in one way or another, or in many ways, just go hog wild with the foundation that they've already made. And that's sort of what irritates me about the sort of cycle of so many games, and especially the discourse around them, where somebody put up a frame of God of War 2018 and a frame of God of War Ragnarok and be like, it's the same game, why would I buy this twice? And I'm like, you are a moron.
I want to talk a little bit about the remake stuff here. For me, I would not rate the 3DS and N64 versions of Ocarina any differently. It's a 9 and a 9. I have a preference for one over the other, but it's largely unimportant, because I think the quality of life stuff kind of offsets whatever my taste is. This game being so fucking dreamy and moody, I really think a lot is lost if you're playing the more polished 3DS version. I would give the 3DS like a 9 and the N64 like a 9.5. It's the same thing as Silent Hill 2. It's fucking fog. And all the fog is there for is draw distance shit. Like it's really just there to mask the limitations. But it fucking adds this layer of dreamlike kind of oddness. And when you're adventuring especially, it just kind of adds like an element of threat and danger. And I think that there's just something lost in the HD translation of this. I feel very similarly about the HD remaster of Dark Souls, where you lose the fog and you lose those textures of the PlayStation 3, and it just like it looks smoother and nicer to a certain extent, but it loses that kind of like rough, grimy shit that kind of makes the game feel like what it is. So this is one of the first ones where the remake feels like a step down to me, as opposed to a lateral move, or realistically something that improves certain things and maybe doesn't quite cohere to my aesthetic. I don't really get where this one is has the same quality of life ups, because I don't really have that with Majora's Mask where I'm like irritated about certain things. I can't think of anything in the 3DS version where I'm like, oh yeah, that makes this easier, that makes this better. But I can with Ocarina. Yes.
Some of them kind of stem from just overall, the aesthetic of it is a little more polished, and therefore I have more fun in this part of the game. I like the foggy and haziness of the N64 title. I do not like the overwhelming brown of so much of it.
There's that. What's that first like Deku temple thing that you go and fight the boss?
Oh, that's a visual clusterfuck.
It is. There's something kind of. I think what I would say is Ocarina is the best 3D Zelda game that they could make with that technology. It was the cutting edge, and Majora's is like, we made a Zelda game for the oddity that was the N64. And it is the N64 game to me, other than like Super Mario 64, which is closer in spirit to the Ocarina thing I just described, making the most cutting edge version of the thing on this hardware. This is like, how do we take those assets? How do we take this physics engine, whatever, and make it into something that feels like you couldn't play this on another console? And that is how the 3DS one makes me feel. It's like I feel like I'm playing a slightly different game. I think I would put this in S, and I would put the 3DS one in A, personally. I know that's probably pretty petty, but
yeah, I mean, I can't begrudge you that. You know, I like playing Dark Souls Remastered because it gets up to 60 frames per second. Like that.
Blight Town is a little bit less suicide
yeah,
in the remastered version, but it loses some of that shitty, nasty quality. I don't know. There's a trade-off. Sometimes I think that the digression of video games, when we get to Breath of the Wild, that's a huge part of what I think is so brilliant about that game design, is that the digression, things that are inconvenience, are where the game really comes to life. And that's more ephemeral and moody in these N64 games. It's something that maybe is coded in nostalgia for me, for sure. But it's something that holds up for me, especially when I don't have to play it on a fucking N64 controller and I can play it on Switch Online or GameCube or whatever.
I don't really have any more to add about this.
This to me is the Zelda game that everyone has to play after they play their first Zelda game, because this teaches you to think about these games in terms of progression horizontally instead of vertically. Other Zelda games are about scaling the mountain. They're about getting to the top. Majora's Mask is about filling out everything that you know and can see and is tangible, and the time travel mechanic is just there to further like drive home that existential dilemma and kind of mire you in its weird Silent Hill-esque atmosphere, where it feels like simultaneously everyone in this place is both living and dead. Like the entire final sequence of this game, I mean, we joked about something being Lynchian before, but you see those little tiny masked kids, and they're talking to you and asking you these random questions. You're going to them, and there's this big, like, when you're a kid, you feel like you're looking into the fucking monolith from 2001 at the end of this game, because you're just like, what in the hell is happening? And it is so amazing. Like, it truly scars you if you play this young.
That part of the game is so fucking Kojima pilled.
That's a great example. That's a great example of something
for Metal Gear Solid 2 and was like, put a little more of this juice.
Kojima's whole vision is like pushing things away from formula and convention and into the experience. And what does it mean to have this experience? So a detail that I love in this game that I think reinforces the importance of the side quests. Every side quest line happens over that 3-day timeline that the game takes place in. And so each time that you reset the clock, it's almost like you've undone the side questing that you've done. They don't have permanent lasting impact because of the fucking time travel mechanic. Yeah. But what you have is a diary. And so if you think about what this game is, you're the boy who was the hero of time, but you're not. You didn't actually live that life. You were sent back in time. And so you go into the woods and you're having this whole thing where all the side quests are like soothing people at the end. Even if it's something as simple as like collecting up a guy's cuckoos and marching them in a row.
It's the Green Knight, Zach. It's the Green Knight.
Which is near, which is like side quest game. It's about how it's not about the impact that you have on the world. It's about the impact that your decisions have on you and your memory and your feelings about yourself and who you want to be and who you choose to be, which has everything. Like, that's such a perfect thing for the video game medium to explore, because it's about choice and it's about what you do. It's about how you interact and go about certain things. I think there's a reason why this game, Breath of the Wild, let you run through all the temples, even though I would consider that kind of quote unquote wrong. There's a reason why it lets you do that, because it it's your choice. It's like it lets you govern your own experience.
Yeah, and insofar as like, I feel like the 3-day clock works on both a textual and meta-textual level in terms of like,
Absolutely.
you can feel like the ludonarrative dissonance of like, I have to do this as quickly as possible to literally save Termina, but also like once you reach that end of it and be like, okay, now I want to go back and do it all again with all of this stuff, and like really that's just another 3-day cycle, like,
For sure. Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know,
Exactly.
It
sort of just,
interrogates the idea of what a video game is. Like in many ways,
Going
I think
back and
Majora's
making a new
Mask is like
choice.
it's the predecessor to all of those, indie games that really kind of rely on player choice heavily to inform your experience. Stuff like Cave Story or Undertale, like lots of indie games that are like, these games are about video games. And I feel like they trace their DNA right back to here.
I think if we go back to Link's Awakening, which is the proto version of this game, the question kind of becomes, why is it that Link dreams in dungeon exploration? Why is it that his subconscious is about or focused on going and saving people from the evils of the world, right? And I think that's the same thing here, except it deepens those core ideas of not just defeating the great evil, but getting to know the people that you're saving too. And it's such a rich and rewarding experience to get to do that in this game to a level that very, very, very few games I've ever played really come close to. Just fucking stellar.
Our first S entry, and
best
not
3D Zelda game for me, I think, still.
So yeah, these two I have not played at all. The Oracle of Seasons and Ages.
I have.
Yeah, I have as well. I recently actually replayed just a little bit of Oracle of Seasons. I think that there's a little bit of a misconception that these games can be just sort of lumped together as one entry.
They're different.
They are different. They're both of these are the directorial debut for Hidemaru Fujibayashi, who would go on to be the kind of main guy for handheld Zelda games from this point all the way up until the modern era, because he's also the director of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which I would argue are handheld games, even though they're also mainline console games. What this couple of projects represent is a little bit of an experiment, one that went on for so long that they were released at the very, very, very end of the Game Boy Color's life cycle before the Game Boy Advance. And what the director wanted to achieve, he was working at Capcom at the time. This is I believe both of these, Minish Cap, were Capcom titles that were Nintendo
Four
licensed.
Swords.
And what they wanted to do was distill the Zelda experience into 3 aspects, which they were going to theme based on the 3 pieces of the Triforce: power, wisdom, courage. And ultimately that proved to be a little bit too complicated. And so what we get is these 2 different games. Oracle of Ages is oriented around the action of Zelda, the combat, the boss fights. Oracle of Seasons is oriented around the puzzle solving. And why they're split is meant to kind of reflect this idea of choice again. And not just choice, but non-linearity. The ability to play either one of these 2 games first and play the second game, like whichever one you didn't play, second, and input like a password system that would allow you to kind of fuse the 2 games into one larger experience. And I think that that really sets the tone for like what modern Zelda is all about with these 2 most recent games in terms of pick your own version of this game. Do you want a sword fight or do you want to solve puzzles? Do you want to do both? Do you want to do one first then the other? It's your choice. You can do whatever you want. For me, Oracle of Seasons of these 2 games is the one that holds up a little bit better because I think that its puzzle focus makes it more unique among the 2D Zelda entries versus Ages feels like a combat game that just lacks what the other 2D games have. I'd probably put both in C, but if we wanted to give a little bit of weight to Seasons, maybe like a light B and then the other one a C. They're both about a 7 out of 10 to me. They're good. They're interesting and they are forward thinking. But obviously, with the Game Boy Color, like there's just a lot of ambitious things that they tried to do that would be better explored once they had more power to do that than they would in this 8-bit era here.
I actually agree with you down to your preference. Even the slight edge to the tier, maybe, just because what I couldn't ever get past was the fact that the more combat focused of these two games doesn't have combat that's as good as Link to the Past. Right. And I'm just kind of like, well, then that kind of renders this a bit redundant now, doesn't it? And I do like both of them are fun, like baseline. They're good video games and they're accessible enough to be enjoyable even by today's standards, I think. But that said, it definitely is held back a little bit by the limitations of the system in a way that the games really haven't been limited yet, at least not just from like a game design perspective, but like if these would have probably made better Game Boy Advance games than they would have Game Boy games, in my opinion.
To that end, they're two of the best looking Game Boy Color games because they came so late in the cycle. There's a lot of visual polish when you're playing Oracle of Seasons, as that title implies. You have an ability that allows you to change it from fall to winter to spring to summer. And seeing those maps with the leaves and the snow, it is a very beautiful looking Game Boy game. But it certainly would have been a more beautiful Game Boy Advance game, and I think that that's proved by the next game that this director would work on, which was Minish Cap.
Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you what, I think, because looking at this list, I think maybe only one other game would end up in the B tier. So I'm going to put Seasons in B and Ages in C. Do you want that behind or ahead of the very first?
I
would put both ahead.
But I would probably put it ahead as well. I just enjoy it more.
Is the blue one Ages? I thought the blue one was Seasons.
I actually can't see, and I don't remember.
I can't tell either.
Yeah, the blue one's Ages.
Blue one's Ages. Yeah, okay. That is the one that I would put in the lower.
Word. All right, so now we're at the Wind Waker.
A great game. Misunderstood in its time, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Everybody real butthurt about the switch in style.
And that is the best thing about this game.
Yeah,
they were that about Majora's too, like you being a kid, all that kind of stuff. So, what's those hands really?
It's just I personally would put this. I think it's like an empirical improvement on Ocarina of Time.
I agree,
but not by peeps or anything. There are a number of ways that the HD version in particular makes some of the endless sailing, particularly in the final stretch of it, more tolerable. But it's not enough of a difference for me to put two separate entries of it. So I could certainly see an argument for Ocarina being better, and it's certainly more influential. But from a plot to visuals to combat, I prefer Wind Waker in pretty much almost every regard. So I would put it. I still don't like it as much as Link's Awakening, but put it handsomely between these two.
It's about that's 8 for me. I would put it high B personally, but I think A is a respectful and great place for the game to land. It has a lot of
sake. I will put it below A Link to the Past. I'll put it at the tail end of A.
It's a game that is really fun to play. I love the kind of like weapon thieving mechanics that you have to it. Yes. Obviously, the stylization is adding this new flavor, and you get the sense of this Link almost as an all-new character, as in a new timeline, a new chronology. And it feels fresh and original, and it really speaks to the GameCube's fucking, like, what do I want to say here? Nintendo GameCube is one of their strongest eras because every game for it was just so pleasurable to play. It just felt good to move those characters around and perform their actions. And so just playing this game is fucking fun. Baby. Like, it's just fun. I don't have as much personal attachment to the narrative and the characters in this one, although it all comes together as like a aesthetic and emotional experience unto its own. Great world. I love the kind of watery, seafaring nature of it, although lots of fucking sailing, you're right.
Yeah.
But it's just like one of those like purely fucking enjoyable video games. I've really been I've had a gratifying experience with it each time I've revisited it. It's not one of the ones that I reach for very often, maybe because it's not on Switch for some reason.
Uh-huh. Have to dig
Put
up
it
the
on.
damn Wii U or the GameCube to play the thing. Go fuck yourself.
I think the HD version of this is one of the rare ones where I'm just like, that's a categorical improvement that just looks better and is better.
Yeah.
They kind of overdo it on the bloom a little.
Yeah, it's a
but
little
it just
aggressive.
Kind of, but it looks nice. Like, it looks like a really good game. So
yeah,
I want to come out and lobby, like, it should definitely stay in the A tier purely because Morgan would put it in A, Zach would put it in high B, and I would put Wind Waker in S. For every reason that people who grew up with Ocarina love Ocarina as much as they do, I love Wind Waker for that purpose. For me, this is the ideal adventure game. The seafaring stuff feels like that's just when I think about the pure raw essence of adventure, like seafaring, piracy, and exploring this world is like, to me, I like the endless sailing just because it piques my curiosity in a way that not many other games were able to. Like, with the things with Ocarina and Majora is that they take place in Termina Hyrule, and they're like, I think of the level design of those like overworlds as being like arenas. Like, there's a centralized place, and then everywhere just kind of stems off from that place. It's kind of like Shadow of the Colossus in that respect. But with me, with Wind Waker, it feels like a boundless actual map. Like, I think that the roots of Breath of the Wild are really mostly found in this game. And like all of the aesthetic things that it takes and ramps up a little bit are things that I think just directly not only make it a better looking and more aesthetically pleasing game, but make it like an empirically better experience. The way that everything is characterized in this game is like, it's timeless to me in the same way that Ocarina's narrative is timeless to somebody like Zach, in that like just the idea of like going to save your sister being like the call to adventure. It's very like 2000s anime in that respect. Like, I think about One Piece whenever I think about this game, which, you know, similar seafaring kind of vibes and adventure, but like that kind of call to action, the fact that Zelda is kind of like sidelined as a different character for most of this game, and that you're kind of learning about the world in a way that like you actually want to learn about this kind of version of Hyrule and like what led it to be the way that it is. Like, you feel like you're in an organic world that has changed. Like, you're seeing the ghost of like the Zoras when you interact with like the instruments and stuff, and you see that they evolved into like birds and whatnot. There's a sense of really, really cool continuity. I love Ganon in this game because when he shows up, he's not like this purely evil, malevolent presence. He's like someone who wants to restore.
Massive head.
He does have a massive head, and then you drive your fucking sword into the top of his skull in the final boss fight, which is one of my favorite Ganon fights. The water all around you, just like, again, this game's visual flair is like unparalleled to me. Like, the only reason I prefer Majora is that like it's just a more tighter package, but like Majora is great because it's a separate thing from the normal default Zelda experience. Wind Waker to me is the normal default Zelda experience.
I'm not as in love with the dungeon designs in this one as I am in the last two. I just think that
Ocarina's dungeon designs are better. I'll give you that.
Yeah. I think that's kind of where I like
past the first three of them anyway.
I enjoy two of the first three in that game. The Deku one, and what's the other one besides Jabu Jabu? What's the other one? What's the third one?
We're gonna
the Goron shit.
Yeah,
some on Death Mountain.
Yeah. That one's cool. I like that one.
Yeah, I can't remember. Anyway.
Yeah, good video game.
One I haven't played in. Like, I was just mentioning that I haven't. This one and the next one and the next one. The next few I have not played in too long, so some of
See,
my
and this is my era, so like these are all
yeah.
the ones that I have the most experience with.
You know, since Jake's lobbying for S, I will put it slightly ahead of a Link to the
Yeah, I
Past.
think that's right.
Thank you.
I think as a
that
conglomerate of our three takes, that's about
Yeah.
right.
that feels right to me. I'm
Um,
okay with that.
All right, so the last one of these that I haven't played, Minish Cap.
Yeah.
What are we thinking?
That's
A tier, motherfucker.
That would be a B for me over Oracle
Fair.
of Seasons. Again,
I like this game a lot more than most people.
So this is one of the ones that I didn't play as a kid. I came back to this one and I only played it on an emulator. So I've never had the Game Boy cartridge for the Game Boy Advance, played it the way that I have played the Link to the Past Four Swords Game Boy Advance game, right? Or Metroid Fusion or Zero Mission or whatever other. This incredible console. My point is I think I would like it a little more if I had played it that way. And that it was if I had a little bit more time, like if we had like one more week, I've been so sucked into a Breath of the Wild replay. This is the one that I would have tried to sneak in there along with Link's Awakening because I just know that it's not quite fresh. Like I was saying about the last two Ages and Seasons, this game looks fucking good.
My God.
It looks so good.
These are some of the best 2D sprites that anyone has ever made. Like it looks like the kind of thing that like a fan of the games from this era would make. Like it reminds me of stuff like Shovel Knight, where the idea is to recreate an older aesthetic, but polish it with all of, the modern bells and whistles to the point where it basically looks like a completely different thing. The fluidity of the like it's so great, and it's also like really bright as well. Like the backlight really takes advantage of how colorful and saturated. Like I think this is the best looking 2D Zelda game probably, period. I know that like you can say that like Link Between Worlds it's like got 3D, but like I don't think game's aesthetic unity is nearly as strong as this one.
Yeah, I don't know how it would fall in that. Like that's definitely a 3D game with 2D mechanics.
Yeah.
We're talking about in terms of the 2D sprite design. I think I might agree.
Just how it looks.
It's just Game Boy Advance 32-bit sprite design allows you to do so much detailed shit and get so
Metroid Fusion,
like
another game.
Pokemon games of this era, like the animated sprites of Pokemon Emerald and things like that. Just or Red Fire, Red Leaf Green, how just gorgeously detailed they would look before getting to like the DS processing power. So yeah,
this has debatably, in my opinion, the best 2D Zelda dungeons, and it's purely because I feel like people haven't played this game. Like they're so well themed, they're so well designed. I think that the only other 2D Zelda game that even has like the same level is Link Between Worlds. Like that's the only one where I would say that it just combines all of the best sensibilities of like the system and like just drawing from the series roots and what have you. It's just that most people haven't played this game, but Jesus, it also has a fantastic soundtrack. It kind of has that appeal of being like recognizably a Zelda game, but it's like Majora and that it's different enough in some respects that it feels refreshing when you come to it. You're like, oh, this feels different. It's that weird added Capcom flavor that's just kind of inexplicable.
I think that it's been too long for me to fully comment on the dungeons. I definitely think that it works best on the same kind of scale that I would rate a game like Link to the Past on, which is as an action game, as the polished feedback, tactile, how fun is it to go in here and swing your sword around, and the design of the game to kind of emphasize that strength. I think it's even easier than Link's Awakening from memory. Like it's even more accessible, which starts to get a little bit less captivating for me, like somebody that, because I think Morgan and I had this conversation once. Like if you're ever going to play the game Link to the Past, if you're not old like me and you haven't played it already, I would certainly recommend getting into other Zelda games first because it's for someone with experience, somebody who knows how these games work in order to be able to do it. Minish Cap would be a phenomenal starting point Zelda game for me, but I don't think that it quite scratches my itch. But I would love to replay it and find out how that holds up. I don't really have any memories of like the narrative or the story or anything like that, like I would with Link's Awakening.
It's more lighthearted. It's a bit more just like up on its face charming than a lot of them are, but
you get some
like
like tingle.
it's
The Minish Cap refers to the Minish race, which I believe.
and they're he's the little hat bird guy. He's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. There is like a lot of fun Capcom flavor. It's kind of one of those things where it's like this doesn't really feel like a Nintendo game, except that it's a Zelda game.
mm-hmm.
Like it's Zelda in mechanics and aesthetic and everything, but it just you can kind of tell a different company made it. It's just not really made how they would have made it, which makes it refreshing in a lot of ways.
It's almost my favorite 2D Zelda. Like just it's not quite there, but almost.
Yeah, so this would be B. This is like a 7 out of 10. I would put it in the B.
Yeah, like a
I was gonna say it's like an 8.5 A tier for me. Like just a premium. Oh boy, this is the real interesting stretch right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll put it like this: Zach has Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
Jake has Wind Waker, and I have Twilight Princess. To me, this is like the platonic ideal of a 3D semi-linear Zelda game. It's so much of a fusion of both Ocarina and Majora and little Wind Waker there, and dashes and fits and starts. And yes, it is overstuffed and too long and kind of tedious in places. And I also think that all of these games so far kind of suffer from that in some way or another. So I think that's just kind of endemic to the experience in some senses. But ultimately, it is the experience to me. This is the first Zelda game that came out that I was like cognizant of and anticipating the release of. And I just, so many memories and so much dimly lit joy out of this title.
Oh, dude, my friend got a Wii and like the day it came out, and I went and spent the weekend at his house, and we just like I have so many memories of just like being awake at 7 a.m. because you slept for a single hour in like shifts because you were both playing this video game, and we were both like in the tunnel with like Midna when like you first find her, and we were just exploring all this, and it was like, you know, when you're a kid and I've been weaned on Nintendo consoles. So Twilight Princess up until this point is the biggest, prettiest game I've ever seen. Like it is literally like, I remember being small and I'm like, oh, this is what people felt like when they went and turned on their N64 for the first time. Because like I was seeing that and I was just like, this is unfathomable. And I was obsessed with this game when it came out for years.
There's a scaling thing that will continue to happen into some of the modern games where you're like, wow, that map is the size of this tiny fraction of the next game's map. I think
yep.
They had not yet gotten to the point where they knew how to fill a map like that out. And so to me, this kind of ends up feeling like a stretched out and distended Ocarina. I have a very old opinion on this game. I don't dislike it. Don't take anything that I say as like, this is a bad game. If Majora's Mask represents my favorite archetype of something, where you take the formula, you take the sauce, and you subvert it, and you turn it inside out, and you freak it, and do all sorts of weird shit, this is my least favorite archetype of something. This is the what am I looking for here? The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade of Zelda games. We are swerving out of Temple of Doom, and we are going back to the original. And that's fine, because I think that there is an iterative quality to video games. This was both the send-off of the GameCube and the welcome of the Wii, which also complicates my opinion of it, because while I love the GameCube, that was just sort of late in its life cycle. It was literally like kind of the last game for it, basically. And I don't fucking care for the Wii. I would love to just play this game again, but particularly on a Switch or something, just to reassess
the Wii U remaster is the ideal way to experience it, and unfortunately for everyone, but like
Shigeru AG,
you have the power. Do
you hate money? I know you don't. You
I
made
know that this game
made Tears of the Kingdom $70 for no reason.
I know that this game would look so good with an HD remaster. I think particularly if you went with the studios that either did Wind Waker or you did the studio that did, the 3DS remakes. I obviously really gorgeous game. I've never really liked the aesthetic, and I've never really liked the tone. And I think just in general, I've always felt like this was a safe overcorrection into like people really bashing on Wind Waker and Majora's for being different or being cartoony or being childish. And so I think that there's just kind of like an edginess that just rubbed me the wrong way at that age. But all of that said, fun fucking game to play, and the temple design in this one slaps. Like,
so good. Dude, when you get the double claw shot, it is like god tier.
So I know that I would have a lot of fun playing this now because I do think that it just takes that combat and finds such a polished place for it. And the puzzles are really nice. There's like these bits of Breath of the Wild, like the DLC Master Sword trial, that really reminds me of what it was like to do these really fucking long Twilight Princess dungeons, which are like for passionate fans of this type of thing, but they're really gratifying too.
Because not a lot of them really challenge you once you kind of figure out their bit. Like, one of the unfortunate things about a lot of the Zelda games that I like is that a lot of them is kind of reliant on your first playthrough of them being like the primary one that you go back to for your thoughts on it. Because sometimes when the Zelda dungeons are a little bit easier, they become like sleepwalking when you revisit them.
For sure.
Whereas Twilight Princess feels like, for many respects, it is kind of a safe overcorrection, and also bizarrely is kind of the Zelda fans' Zelda game, because there is just so much of it, and there's enough intuition in the design so that the bloatedness is noticeable but never really obstructive with my experience. And I kind of bizarrely have the same opinion as like you on like the art style, but there is kind of a Majora's Mask to it all works. And that, like, again, when I was a kid and saw this shit, I thought it was so dope. Like, the Twilight Realm aesthetic and those monsters and shit were scary as fuck. Zant was creepy as shit. I loved how Midna looked. Like, all of the stuff that like isn't mainline Hyrule in that game is cool as shit.
I do think that there's a nice mood. Particularly, there's that guy that teaches you to sword fight, which is heavily implied to have been kind of the link of Majora's Mask.
Ocarina and Majora,
I think it's of that whole cycle and saga and everything. So there is kind of a cool horror to it. This game, I'll just use this as the one point to talk about. This same year, which I think was 2006, there was a PlayStation 2 game made by Clover called Okami.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great HD remake, which you can play on Switch. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Great motion controls in that. One of the few games that has tolerable. It's another. It's basically what they wanted to do was make an Ocarina of Time style game, and I think that I've always found that to be a very fun complement to Twilight Princess, because of the fact that you have so much like dog stuff. Like, you have like Dog Link, and you have you're running around as Amaterasu in Okami. Yeah, and I've always loved that game for its like really cheeky sense of humor, and I think it helped deepen my appreciation for the formulaic nature of 3D Zelda games, and for Okami is obviously really rooted in Japanese folklore and in Shinto and that kind of mythological literature, and it helped me to kind of appreciate
less Princess Mononoke, more Tale of the Princess Kaguya.
Absolutely, yeah, that's literally Princess Kaguya is in Okami, so yes, 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
But like cheeky and funny, and I think it just helped to kind of pull out how much Shinto and Japanese culture is in Princess Mononoke or is in Zelda, but is kind of in this Western fantasy genre, and this Twilight Princess game to kind of bring it back to that. Just a great collision of Eastern Western fantasy that I think is a really big appeal of these games, and that really stands out in this kind of big epic, almost this is like post Lord of the Rings ass Legend of Zelda right here.
Yeah, it's I like to think of it as being comparable to there's kind of a, well, I mean, for lack of a better word, there's kind of a Full Metal Alchemist of it all kind of going on. Like the what I think about is the two main opposing villains of that show, both representing the Eastern and Western influences on aesthetics and art and culture. And then when they fight each other, they have those colliding like Eastern and Western dragons. That's what I think about when I think of Twilight Princess, is that it's a complete collision of the Eastern and the Western dragon into something that looks kind of alien and unrecognizable and really cool if you consume a lot of media that's geared towards one or the other.
Okay, where do we all? This is a hard S for me.
It's a high A for me.
I would say that this is very controversial. I would say that it is a B for me. With so I know some caveats.
Lowball, we can meet with the A then. I think
I would put it. I think yeah. I was gonna say in front of Ocarina feels like the consensus for the group.
I do like Twilight a little bit more than Ocarina. It's similar, but I would prefer it. I would prefer it confidently if the one like empirically bad thing about Twilight Princess is that it takes 2 hours to start playing the video game. It's a long opening segment.
I'm full like Kingdom Hearts 2 tutorial pill on that one. Where I'm like, this is elemental to the experience.
This game does actually have like strong Kingdom Hearts vibes in many ways for me.
Yeah, it does.
It does.
Jake, are you more Wind Waker or Twilight Princess?
Wind Waker for sure.
Yeah, so I think I'm trying to think of what the correct order is here. So for me, I would go Ocarina over Wind Waker over Twilight Princess would be my order for those three.
Mine's
3D games.
Mine's Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Ocarina.
See, I think you two both have Ocarina last. I think Ocarina should probably be at the back.
In the middle.
I think it should. I think it should go. Oh. Yeah, I would think it would go.
Oh yeah, because yeah. You're right.
I think it goes Wind Waker, then Twilight, then Ocarina for the consolidated list.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think. I don't know. It doesn't matter. They're all in the same A tier right
now. That's true.
I just want to fucking so bad. So just leave it. It's pedantry at this point anyway. So now we have some interesting Nintendo DS titles.
Yeah. This is where I probably sound my least enthusiastic as these two.
Bottom of the D tier, Phantom Hourglass.
Yeah.
Yes, just some
the worst Zelda game, like a mainline Zelda game without question.
I would give this a 5 out of 10 and say that it's better than Zelda 2, personally. But that
I'm inclined to agree just because it's nicer to look at.
But that fucking main dungeon. Nintendo DS.
Oh, that's fucking dungeon. Jesus.
Nintendo DS. This is the same time as Pokemon Diamond Pearl Platinum, which has, I think it's kind of a design mentality of this era.
Naming convention.
Where it's like the fucking giant map. And the thing with Diamond Pearl Platinum is that there's this big fucking mountain in Sinnoh, and you go under the mountain, you go across the mountain, you go over the mountain, and you have to kind of traverse east and west on that map. This game is the same way, except instead of a mountain, it's that fucking central temple, and it's like on one level, you're like, wow, genius way to take what makes Link's Awakening work so well, that everything is so tightly designed. But then you just hit X5, thought that would make it better, and it just makes it tedious as fuck.
Oh, unbelievably. It's the only Zelda game to me that is straight up not fun, both because of that design and because this has, with Twilight Princess, I don't feel like it's empirical that we mention it because you can play Twilight Princess without the motion controls and they're not as like prominent. But like this also has the DS gimmick of having to move your character the way that you do in these games with the stylus and like drawing this little path. And I do not like this at all.
It's like
even DS... if the game was built like a normal Zelda game, traversing it is a pain in the ass.
It's just about both this and Spirit Tracks. I just like this is some DS hardware selling junk. Like
Yeah,
it's
weakest
just
aspect of both.
it is slightly more artistically integritous than Link's crossbow training. I don't like it. It's bad. However, yeah, fuck it. Just put it below Link's.
It's to me, it's
Zelda
also
2.
the ugliest Zelda game because it's like the color design is like as bad as like the murkier and muddier titles in this franchise, and the DS's hardware just isn't really great with these 2D models. So it's just kind of this amorphous, fake kind of collage of the Minish Cap and Wind Waker aesthetic, except worse. And it's lit worse, and it's just there's just nothing about this game that's appealing to me, frankly. I see very little point in it.
Yeah, fair enough. Spirit Tracks is
all
a
right.
little better. It's a little better.
Yeah, I think this is a good game, actually. Not a great one, but a good game.
I would definitely put it above Phantom Hourglass, but honestly, it's like even less memorable.
Yeah.
It's like I don't remember it being as I don't know.
This one
I really like the gimmick because the gimmick of Zelda being in that suit of armor yields a lot of really nice, fun, like I think this is actually one of the better like written Zelda games, just because like the characterization and humor is really on point, and it's a better looking game. The soundtrack's better, and I like the train shit more than I like the sailing shit. It's like a 6 out of 10 video game, but I mean, give it to me over Phantom any day of the week. I'd put it maybe low C tier personally, but I don't really care that much.
I don't know. It's still just like I have to swing my sword with this fucking stylus. Fuck.
It still sucks.
Yeah,
still sucks.
I don't care for the mechanics there. It's something that a lot of DS games naturally suffer from, like whether the game is fun, like The World Ends With You, which I think is a very fun game to play, or it's a pain in the ass, like Kid Icarus, like any of the fucking DS Kid Icarus games. It's just like it's difficult to get into the groove of and feel like it's intuitive, and you admire the innovation of it, and that it doesn't just continually clone the same idea of what a 2D top-down Zelda is, but it just I mean,
at what cost?
When is the next time you're gonna fucking pick up a Nintendo DS and be like, all right, let's play this?
If I'm gonna be hurting my hand for a fucking difficult to play DS game, I'm gonna go with Kid Icarus, because I have deepened my like giving myself arthritis early because I've played that game so much, because it's fun. It's like terribly designed ergonomically, but it's a fun video game. This isn't really that fun.
Yeah.
I'm keeping a track of my own tier list, and we're gonna fight each other about our final tier list. I'm sure it's gonna be very funny. How different they all are.
Yeah. Okay. So
here's the real. Here's the mountain.
Oh yeah, this is my least favorite 3D Zelda game for sure. Right here.
Not even close.
Easily. Very easily.
This version of the game, the original Wii release, I don't even have an issue with the Wii Motion Plus motion control shit. It's like it's not
fine.
It's not fun, but it doesn't really.
It's not preferable. I would like the game more if it didn't have it, but I don't completely hold it against it.
Yeah.
Motion controls in general are best served optionally. It's something that every Switch game with motion controls has gotten right, is that you can totally just turn them off if you don't care for them. And I think most of them have been implemented pretty well. To be honest, I think that they've gotten that with like gyroscopes. The whole fucking like idea of the bar and the sensor, so your fucking controller has to be like pointed at the screen, is so ergonomically fucked and so not fun. Like
why the Mario Galaxy games are better on the Switch than they are on the Wii. Like, why do you even have a remote with those games?
Yeah, I never even liked on the Wii trying to like point at the screen to select menus. I don't even like that shit. Just let me fucking click. Okay, button. Thank you. Where's my fucking D-pad, bro?
Literally, let me cook.
Yes, let me. I want to.
My ideal controllers are like the PS DualShock and like the SNES D-pad and like 4 buttons and some shoulder bumper thingies. Let's go. Depending on the type of game, of course.
Yeah,
Don't
I don't know.
miss me with this motion control shit for the most part.
For me, I would put this below all of these so far. Because
Wow.
this version of the game, yes, Fee like almost certainly permanently killed the idea of like a companion character, and for good reason, because go away. It's like the exact opposite of Zelda 2 in the instance of like Zelda 2 is like, how do you think I could ever figure this out? And Skyward Sword is like, how could you ever think I would need help figuring this out?
You know, that's a really good point. And I actually think it speaks to my exact sensibilities vis-a-vis why I'm a little bit more forgiving of those older games, because that's more fun than you trying to fucking handhold me through the world's most linear experience. I keep making Pokemon comparisons. There's not a Pokemon Wii game worth talking about, but just like it's the same thing that franchise really starts suffering from here into particularly the 3DS era is like, just stop hand-holding me so much, man. I want to have an adventure. Remember how the original game, you just kind of wandered from fucking screen to screen. You didn't know where the fuck you were going, and you had to figure things out. There's very little of that here. To me, this is the bottom of the C tier. I don't think it's awful. I kind of like how it functions as the chronological beginning of the larger
I like
story. Yeah, if I were going to make a Zelda movie directly based on a single game, the two choices would be Majora's Mask for its just like richness and how much I love it, and then the second one would be this, because it is such a good starting point. It almost is like a better manga than a video game, which is pretty rare for video games, especially in this franchise. All of these are so thoughtful about how gameplay and narrative are interlinked, where I just feel like this is not that fun to play, but kind of a decent to good story.
Yeah, for the sake of the list, I'm probably going to put this at the top of D. I mean, just because I can't admit that like it is more intuitive moment to moment than even Spirit Tracks, but like an under discussed element of this game that really irritates the shit out of me is the stamina wheel, because why is it here?
Yeah. It's such a rich mechanic later on.
Yeah, eventually. Here it serves absolutely no purpose, even in the superior version of the game. That it's like when you're climbing walls and you're running out of stamina, there will be the little green orbs there to refill your stamina. So there's like nothing is gained and nothing is lost by even having this here. And the at best, like the way that the stamina wheel affects gameplay the most is when you want to run faster and then you have to stop because you used up all your stamina. And it's like, why just let me run faster?
There's about Skyward Sword is designed to make the experience more cumbersome. There's just like a million little things that make this game so, for lack of a better word, slow to actually experience. Like, there is so much text box dialogue in this game. I know people have like a weird thing with voice acting in Zelda games, and it's still controversial with the newer ones, but like, if you're gonna have this much dialogue in this game, have it spoken by someone. Because like there are points where it feels like you are reading a novel.
No, you have a great point
there. I agree, but like at a certain point it would probably take them longer to say all that than to even read it all
just
out.
Rewrite the game, please.
It's and that's the thing ultimately, is that yes, there's Fee, yes, there's the stamina wheel, yes, there's the annoying amounts of text boxes. All of that certainly, it snowballs into this, but the fact that this is so low on my ranking comes down to the fact that it is so long. Like,
it's
my God,
this is like than Twilight Princess.
This is literally like a 50-hour game, and it's a linear adventure.
Yeah.
There's no need for that.
And there's a lot of backtracking too, like a lot of it, like more than there's ever been in these games.
Well, and it starts to get into this thing that I think I could argue it's the reason why Ocarina of Time is not a 10 out of 10 for me, even though I love that game so much, is like, what's the point of making a map bigger if all I'm going to do is sprint across it? Can you explain that to me? That seems pretty fucking stupid. If the only point of a map being big is so that you can ride a horse, why? There are games that make that kind of sparseness and openness work, like Shadow of the Colossus, which has
Shadow of the Colossus, yeah,
perfect integration of narrative and gameplay, so that everything that you do while you're playing it enhances the story, and the story enhances the thing that you're doing. I find that to just be a complete disconnect here. And it's like literally a game I would rather not play. It's definitely a 5 out of 10. I would not give it a positive rating. Yeah, I think it's in about the right
this version of it. 5 out of 10. Yeah,
I sadly have
will
not
say
played the HD remake.
I haven't either, but I will say I would probably like it more because the one compliment I'll give this game is that the dungeon design, like just the dungeons, is pretty good. Like I really like the vast majority of this game's dungeons, which is like half the game. So that's not insubstantial. And it's kind of a double-edged sword in that the bosses in this game are either series best or series worst, and there's no in between. There are bosses like Galactos that are awesome, and then there's the imprisoned fights, which all suck.
So yes, I imagine that the follow-up would be better, that it would look better, that it would feel better, but I just don't. I can't. The reason I haven't played it is because I just don't feel like it's gonna solve the basic issues that I have with it.
And you might be right. This is certainly in its best form, confidently my least favorite of the 3D Zelda titles. That said, I'm gonna put it in the high B tier here. There are a couple reasons for this. Overall, I want to say my overall play time and my time with the Switch version was cut from 50 hours to about 35.
Oh yeah, much better.
There are a number of reasons for this. Text boxes will just appear all the way, or at least go faster when you hit A as they're scrolling along. So you can literally just like wham, wham, wham. And I read very fast, so that's very helpful in just smoothing out the feeling of this game overall. Fee appears way less. They deliberately dialed that back so much. And it's a godsend. Because the game is still really simple and too hand-holdy, but it's also like literally this purple bimbo isn't popping up every 5 seconds to tell me how easy what I'm doing is. And even then, though, she still shows up too much. Go away forever.
Yeah. I think I just have a hard time even enjoying that over the original Zelda. There's just something really fucking grating about games that do that for me, where I'm just like, I just don't want to do this. I really don't want to listen to you tell me how to play this game. Fuck off.
Yeah, and I certainly can't begrudge you that, but like, I don't know, especially in HD when everything's been sharpened. Like, I wasn't expecting to even like the controllerified version of this game's combat, where you aim when you're locking on, you aim the right stick directionally how you want to swing the sword. But like after about like an hour or two of coming to grips with it, this is probably my favorite combat system in these games so far. It feels really intuitive because like you just flick the stick in like the direction you want to swing the sword instead of like cumbersomely aiming it and then swinging it like I thought it would be at first. Like the first encounter with that really fruity dude, I can't remember his name.
Girahim.
Yeah, him.
Cool villain.
First encounter with him sort of like re-teaches you how to play the game in this new control scheme. And once you have that down, I found it to be a lot of fun. But yeah, overall still a very flawed game that I don't see myself revisiting anytime soon, but I definitely had a great time with it.
Amazing soundtrack. the best thing about the game, bar none.
Yeah.
That's the story of the Wii, Mario Galaxy and such.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck the Wii,
So yeah.
by the way. Just signing off by saying fuck the Wii. I didn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shit was never cool.
We hardly know we knew you way too well. That was the issue.
Yeah. I mean, good for you. It was like one of the most genius moves in company history. They were selling video games to like grandmas and aunts and shit like that. But I think part of
I want to play Super Smash Brothers. Let me play Super Smash Brothers.
Right. Yeah, I think they kind of compromised.
Put Melee in the disk drive. That is how. So yeah, now we have Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds for the Nintendo 3DS.
Much love for the 3DS by huge contrast to what I was just saying. One of the greatest libraries.
To me, this is a hard S. This is my favorite. This is my favorite 2D Zelda game. It's literally all of the stuff I love about A Link to the Past and none of the things that annoy me, plus some new stuff that was like the wall merging and the sort of the playing with perspective in the game.
What a seamless mechanic, honestly.
Just ingenious level stuff. I love Ravio and the sort of rental system that he employed. Just like there's
so much freedom.
There's not an element to this game that I do not absolutely adore.
It's the best remake of any of them. Of all the remakes of this entire franchise, Majora's, Ocarina, Wind Waker, whatever.
To such a degree, to such a degree that I don't even really think of it as a remake. Like the core really feels so different to me, even though it is on like the bones of A Link to the Past in so many ways.
It takes that and kind of obviously uses the technology to kind of expand that dimensionally and adding character, aesthetic. It's such a wonderful game. It's like really fun to play. For me, it will never replace the feeling of that original game in terms of like the action and the combat. But it just, I mean, if you were a person who had never played any Zelda games before, ever in your life, none of them, this is the first one I would tell you to play. I would tell you to get a 3DS, and I would tell you to play A Link Between Worlds, because it will totally integrate you to everything about the world, teach you how to think about the games, teach you how to approach combat, teach you how to approach discovery. It's such an ideal starting point. And I think, like, if you were to tell me that this was like the greatest expression, particularly of the 2D style, but just like of Zelda period, I think that would be a really strong
valid.
This is like high A tier to me. I would put this right over Link's Awakening, which I love. So that would make it my second favorite of all the 2D Zelda games for sure. One of the best 3DS games too, which is like not an easy thing to say.
Man, there was a period where like this game came out, the Pokemon X and Y, and then Ruby and Sapphire remakes came out, Animal Crossing came out, like all of those games were released within like the span of like a year and a half, and it was just like a constant barrel of riches. I was like, that was man, dude, Fire Emblem, when all those games came out, that was the closest I came to being happy during my teenage years.
The 3DS was everything that you might have wanted the DS to be.
And then and then they remade Luigi's Mansion on the 3DS, and I was like, well, this is the greatest console of all time now.
You know, the only problem that I have with this game is that it is stuck on the 3DS, which is a console that I have to play like.
Definitely one where you want the XL. Yeah, you definitely want the XL. This would make a great Switch.
I played Awakening, or Fire Emblem Awakening, on Jake's XL.
Yeah,
and even then I was still like, I can't. My hands hurt and my eyes hurt. Put it on the Switch. But yeah, I have nothing bad to say about this game.
Not a thing.
Practically perfect in every way. And on that note,
speaking of which,
do we even need to say anything?
On the whole, like, it is so difficult for me to pick my favorite Zelda game, because not only are my two favorite Zelda games very different, they're not even like, they're barely they're tangentially Zelda games, because my two favorites are Majora and this, and they are such default elaborations on the base formula of the game that it feels both deeply contextual to how you experience the series in a default sense and how you get along with the kind of games that they're trying to be. Like, Majora's Mask is a game for people who like survival horror and weird fetch quest shit and like uncanny, like moody shit that's just weird. Not even necessarily for people who like Zelda games. And then Breath of the Wild is just like, do you feel like these games have always been limited by the fact that they do have somewhat linear game design? And then it asks the question, what if they didn't? And then does it about as well as humanly fucking possible.
For me, this is such a difficult game to assess because it's like trying to eat an entire foot-long sandwich in one bite, like from one end to the other end of it in one. Because the game is so fucking expansive and it throttles formula, if you can even call it a formula, to such a lunatic degree that there's so many aspects and qualities to go through and to parse and to analyze that I think you could consider it like 100 out of 100 video games just on the basis that it's got so many superlative qualities. And when I say superlative, what I mean is like no game that I have ever played feels better to just walk around, climb a tree. I asked a question earlier and I was like, why would you make a map really big if the only point was to sprint across it? And Breath of the Wild emphatically answers, because you won't want to just sprint across it. You will want to take your time and explore every nook and cranny, climb every tree, climb every mountain, dive into every body of water. And I think that from that standpoint, it is like one of the greatest adventure exploration titles ever made. And I also think that it is categorically disappointing in numerous aspects. One of the biggest ones for me is narrative. Morgan's been kind of talking about this tension that gets created between wanting to finish the game versus like wanting to play the game to its most complete and fulfilling point. I think that there is a monster disconnect with the fact that this basically is Ocarina of Time narratively. There was a period where you were going to try to defeat evil and you failed, and a period of time has passed, much longer in this case, and you've got these different segments of the world where you have to kind of go and free them of the calamity of Ganon and everything like that. But unlike an Ocarina of Time, which is a quite linear game for that narrative where you're going from kind of mission to mission to mission, and there is a lasting impact that you make on that world, those aspects here I find underdeveloped because I think the point is to de-emphasize them. I think the point is to kind of put you more into the environmental storytelling, closer to something along the lines of Bloodborne or Shadow of the Colossus, which this game does fucking immaculately. And that's kind of my relationship with Breath of the Wild, is anytime I stumble upon something that is kind of an issue, what I end up working myself back around is to say, this game is just a different expression of what Zelda is than most others, and you kind of got to take that in stride. I kind of wish, one way or the other, that it would either have a more concrete sense of narrative structure, add temples, add in the classic elements, or that it would abandon them to a larger degree and find a way to tell its story that didn't depend on those conventions as much. I kind of feel like it's stuck a little bit in the middle, but truthfully, focusing on those as the identity of the game is stupid. Because truthfully, what this game is to me is a fucking enormous playground with one of the greatest physics simulators ever made. And so you just get to dick around in the most fun sandbox you've ever dicked around.
The best since Portal 2, I think.
I do, in that respect, I do think one thing that, like, as a World of Warcraft player, because this game does kind of get me into that same sink a million hours over your weekend into the game. I think that some of the side questing design could be better.
Sorry. It's just no one, absolutely no one. Zach, as a World of Warcraft player,
listen, it's true. It's true. No, I think that one of the things that could be more developed in this game would be some of the side quest content, but it does such a good job of giving you the motivation vis-a-vis your own survival. Well, what I mean by that is that there could be things that actually make you use the utility that this game gives you, but instead it offers you the freedom to just do whatever the fuck you want. The problem is, and this kind of ties into the narrative stuff, this game is entirely playable by just mashing the swing the sword button. And there are mechanics to push you deeper into the weeds, which is where the fun part is, but it doesn't totally do a good job of like actually bringing you into those elements, I don't think. Not at all times. It depends. Certain things like the like how you upgrade your gear and you have to like go and collect it from wherever in the world, like kill Lynels and shit like that. That's really well developed. That's very World of Warcraft like, right? You got to kill things, get their drops, craft. I think more of that could be expanded upon to make it more, but anything like that makes it more guided and arguably kind of paints its core objective, which is ultimate player freedom. It's just
for
that
every
I think maybe
problem you could have, there's a solution that the game kind of offers in its place that doesn't solve it, but provides an alternative.
I think that there's just a way to look at player freedom and be like, is ultimate player freedom good or bad? And I don't know. You know, I don't. It's an experiment. It's a thought experiment. Whenever you play this game, is like, you really don't have to do anything. You can just like go walk over there and fight a couple guys and collect nuts and berries if that's what you want to do. There's no fucking forced content that you have to do or anything that you have to do in any specific order or any specific way. There's someone made a great comparison to that TikTok video of the girl where she's watching the guy put the blocks and it's like the square goes in the square hole and the triangle goes in the square hole and the circle goes in the square hole. That's the game design of Breath of the Wild in many ways. It's like there's 1,000 solutions to every problem and they all have a degree of rightness to them if you can figure out how to solve it the way that you want to.
And I feel like subsequently there are very specific elements of the game that deviate from that slightly, but they're always to emphasize an element of iconography in these games and make that more meaningful. I'm talking specifically about the Master Sword. Like, you play most of this game without that, and if you play it like people traditionally do, you're going to come across it and you're going to get your character better and you're eventually going to get that sword. And in other Zelda games, it's kind of like, as you've gone on, the improvement that that sword yields to you feels increasingly arbitrary the more time goes on. Like, the difference between the Master Sword in Twilight Princess between a normal sword is non-existent, basically. It's like your damage output, maybe, but that's basically it. Here, there is a tangible difference and a security that you cling to when you get the Master Sword in this game, because it's the only weapon that feasibly doesn't go away, even though it still has somewhat limited use. And I think that these elements make these things important in a way that they've never been and feel refreshing. I mean, that's why you said that there's nothing that you have to do in this game except for beat Ganon, which is why the emphasis of that
you can
finality
play 400
is so
hours
cool.
in this game and never enter Hyrule Castle and still be feasibly doing things.
I'm pretty sure I did that the last time I played this game.
So I think I would almost give an extra half-star rating to the DLC Master Mode version of this game, which adds a couple difficulty modifiers wherein the enemies start regenerating health if you don't keep damage up on them. There's just like there's an extra difficulty tier color of enemies, which is gold. There's like additional treasure and things. There's like other DLC shit that you can do too that I don't think is like as good. But the Master Mode adds this level of like I've seen this levied as a criticism against the game. I think it's total bullshit because the game gives you the freedom to play it however the fuck you want. But there's something really magic about the Great Plateau portion of this game, where everything is kind of in micro, and you're learning all the mechanics, and you realize like you're just frail. You're just a frail little dude with 3 hearts and 1 stamina wheel. You better fucking take care of yourself and learn how the fuck to survive. And I think that pushes you into, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It pushes you into the depth of the mechanics, which is why I think that master mode is good. Because when you're fighting a Lionel in that, you're like, Jesus Christ, dude, I have to keep so much pressure.
You have to get creative.
And you have to use stasis. You have to use your bombs. You have to use every trick in the book to not break every weapon that you have and to make sure that you've got defense buffs or attack buffs. It makes you want to go out there and get the gear and get the gear upgrades and find the shrines. It adds a motivation to the adventure that really just gives everything so much pop. So something that I've been playing this game a lot recently, as Tears of the Kingdom came out, I wanted to finish my master mode file of it, and I've been doing it like a complete psychopath. Like I have like 700 Korok seats. I love the divine beasts in this game. I think that those dungeons are really fun, even though they're kind of compact and simple, and this isn't a very dungeony Zelda game. I love that the shrines are kind of a extension of that Oracle of Seasons. They're very puzzle oriented, right? You go into a shrine, it's kind of one simple puzzle. I absolutely miss the true blue temple experience of this game. And one of the things that I think would be a simple upgrade to this is if all of the 120 shrines did not look exactly the fucking same. And I think that there is a little bit of a variety problem in this game. Like, it's a lot of Lizalfos and a lot of Bokoblins and a lot of Moblins and a lot of, there's so much enemy variety and richness, even in the early versions of Zelda, that I think would make this. I like that the enemies are sparse, actually. I like that it's not just Link to the Past level. Every 6 feet, you gotta fight some guy. But I wish, like, give me some likes. Give me, I don't know, just give me more shit. Give me more of that. You did such a good job of building this into the best possible version of Oracle of Seasons, but I don't always feel like you did the best possible version of Oracle of Ages, where there is a lot of like fun, rich combat stuff to do. But that is what it is. That's the kind of game that it is. And I think to that end, it's fucking spectacular. It is like a defining title of this era of the Nintendo Switch console. And so it is great. For me, it's kind of like back of the A tier, but I totally respect it in the S tier as well.
It is the first time since the Elder Scrolls V where I felt myself become a child again and remember what wonder and exploration. Well, I mean, no, it is. You're 100% correct. And like, but the thing is that Skyrim for me is a contextually important game because that was the first non-Nintendo game I owned and played. And so therefore I'm regimented to think of games in these very linear, interlocked kind of hyperlinked video game style thing. And then you toss me one of the biggest open worlds in gaming, and suddenly my entire viewpoint on this artistic medium is different. And the only thing that has ever come close to expanding my worldview for a medium like that again is when I got to play this again. And I was like, oh my God, there's so much more you can do with that.
Part of my, I want the temples and I want the shrines is like, this is the best looking Zelda game, I think. It's certainly the best lit. And I just think that like a little bit more kind of punch in that direction to give it the forest temple, shadow temple. And I know I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, but I know I've heard some things. So there's a lot of potential, in my opinion, for follow-ups to this. Not just Tears, but like anything that follows this up. Because it is so groundbreaking and it's such a strong foundation from a like physical gameplay standpoint, it just feels so good to move around and to explore and to adventure. And that's really something that you can't get enough of.
I can't fathom them diverting from the formula that they've set themselves up with here to the point where the Zelda series like regresses into something that it would resemble more like Twilight Princess from here on out. I feel like they've established a new precedent that like has to be maintained to some degree.
Newman's confirmed that pretty much this is the template going forward for the time being, at least.
Hell Hell yes.
Which I think opens a cool opportunity to do that kind of 2D, 3D split and have if you wanted to continue to make 2D Zelda games, have those be a little bit more of like the streamlined focused in the same way that you have like Metroid Prime versus your 2D Metroid games like Metroid Dread.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have like a 2D, 3D split. Or Prince of Persia, I think, is doing like a new 2D game where it's just kind of got that more. I love 2D style games. I just think they have like this kind of quick twitch, fun, streamlined, go, bite-sized, handheld. But the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom, such a cool way to take 3D and just say, go. The other game that comes to mind a lot for me with Breath of the Wild is Super Mario Odyssey, because they were both 2017 release year Switch games.
Greatest launch titles of all time.
And they have such a like dichotomous relationship to me, because like Super Mario Odyssey is like all internal. It's about like discovering space within space. And Breath of the Wild's like the same thing, but it's much more external. It's like that spread to the farthest fucking reaches of your imagination. And you just get to go like into some snowy forest, and you roll a snowball down a hill and it blows open a door and there's a big leviathan, and inside there's like fairies. I don't fucking know. I don't remember. I haven't done it in a second. But no Zelda game feels better in terms of just like going out there and finding it, going out there and exploring what the world is. And from there, if you're kind of bringing in your Majora's Mask and those questions that the earlier games ask, I think I was kind of dogging this narrative earlier. It's got really strong emotional beats. I just think that there's a disconnect between how kind of, if that narrative makes me feel like it should be a 30-hour game, and it is like a 200-hour game. It's realistic. It's like 80 to 90.
Well, unless you want it to be a 30-hour game. I mean,
almost everyone I know that's played it like that finds it disappointing, and I think it's because they're not getting into that kind of like deep and rich experience of it. But you know, obviously, different strokes for different folks. People have fun doing different shit.
This is a formula that worked so well that they literally just copy and pasted it onto Pokemon, and that's the best Pokemon game in like 10 years.
I still haven't played it.
I
love Pokemon in spirit.
It retains the strengths and weaknesses of Breath of the Wild in that respect, but it's also kind of a self-correcting issue where it's like all the strengths are so strong that just none of the weaknesses just matter anymore.
It doesn't seem like Tears has gone this way, but one of my favorite aspects of this game is how Animal Crossing like it is, which is to say that you spend a lot of fucking time going around collecting shit or cutting grass and getting a lizard out of the grass.
I like that. I'm very compulsory. I like collecting nuts and berries.
I would, and you know, you even have like the thing where you get to like buy a house and they like open up Terry Town, and there's like all this other like shit that you can do there. I think that there is like kind of room to push things more into that direction, particularly through crafting, which is the World of Warcraft thing that I was saying earlier, where it's just like you use those items to enhance your gear in Breath of the Wild. That's great. It would be cool if you could also like, what if I made this into a fire sword because I had red Lizalfo's tail? Shit like that would just kind of take that to the next level for me. But it's really fucking spectacular as is, of course.
Can we mention at least that this has the best? I know this game gets knocked a little bit for having a weaker soundtrack comparatively, and I feel like that's just more a result of it being a different kind of game that requires a different kind of ambient soundtrack. Exactly.
If you do 120 shrines, you're gonna play this game for between 80 and 100 hours minimum. You don't want to fucking listen to, you know, like repetitive Zelda.
It adds an atmosphere that feels really quintessential to the game, but it also leaves room for the fact that this has the best sound design of any Zelda game. The little boop that you get whenever you pick up something is so satisfying. You just want to be like when you walk into a pile of something after you kill an enemy, you're just like, oh, yeah.
Hinox dropping like 100 roast bass.
Diablo moment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, totally.
That's empirical S tier, the game of all time.
Yes.
Now I am the only one of us who has played Tears of the Kingdom thus far, and
Just
I've
drop it in
completed
B
it.
and then hard cut to black.
Well,
Bye.
yeah, I've rolled credits on the thing after about an 80-hour playthrough. Another confident S tier.
Yeah, I can't say I'm shocked there.
Yeah.
Uh,
My expectation is that I will probably not like it as much as Breath of the Wild based on what I've seen, but I'm really, really curious about that.
yeah,
It's possible. It's really possible. I feel like.
So my feelings on it are, I don't know, I've seen a lot of takes that are like, this is just Breath of the Wild, but more and better, to the point of where like I don't want to play Breath of the Wild ever again. And I soundly reject that. I think it's more or less as good of a game, but like there's so much more going on in Tears of the Kingdom. Like every system has another system on top of that, and like you have the Hyrule map from the first game, and then you have a lot of stuff in the sky, and then you have a map that is the size of Hyrule under Hyrule, not called Lorule, which I think was a missed opportunity.
I was thinking that. I was like, oh
Yeah.
man.
But it's like there's just so much more stuff that it's like it's always as engaging and a lot of times more engaging even than Breath of the Wild. But it's also like I miss the quiet and I miss the simplicity.
It sounds busier.
Yeah, it's a lot busier. Um and it's
Breath of the Wild
great.
has a lot of that Animal Crossing meditative, quieter moments that I appreciate.
You literally just be like, if you're in Breath of the Wild, you jump off of fucking Lanayru, you go down to that southeastern corner of the map, like you're on the beach, and you'll just be like walking along the beach. It'll start fucking raining. And it's just like there's like some rocks along the cliffside. You're collecting up crabs, and you just do that for 40 minutes. And you don't even think about the fact that you're doing it for 40 minutes. You're just vibing. It's like an ambient video game.
And the Tears of the Kingdom definitely had stretches of that for me.
I listened to so much ambient music while playing Breath of the Wild.
It's the Cocteau Twins video game for me.
Oh, and there was tons of that in Tears of the Kingdom, but even those moments are busier. Like instead of just jumping off of Mount Lanayru, I put together a plane and fly down there.
Right.
Like, I don't know. There's just more stuff.
Do you guys remember?
Sure, I prefer that.
Sorry, Morgan, I didn't mean to cut you off.
But I mean, it's basically as good of a game. It's probably my second favorite Zelda behind Breath of the Wild. I mean, like, I'm not sure I can really tell you in so many words why I prefer it to my previous 2 and 3, which were Twilight Princess and Majora's Mask, respectively. But like it matters a lot to me that I sunk 80 hours into this easily and look forward to sinking twice as much in the future. Like, I don't know, that kind of speaks for itself in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
When the original game Breath of the Wild came out and you would go on Twitter and you just watch clips of these fucking like Japanese kids playing this game, you would see some of the craziest tech shit, right? Like using stasis to fucking blast themselves through from the beginning of a shrine to the end of a shrine without doing any of the tasks. There was like a level of creative possibility in those games where you could do things like magnetize, electrify a mine cart and float it around Hyrule by just exploiting the physics of that game. It seems to me that Tears of the Kingdom was mechanically designed to bring people like me who don't think about video games quite that creatively into that process, and I'm really curious how I will take to it, because it's just I never did shit like that in Breath of the Wild. Like, there's certain creative things that I like to do, but I'm not fucking shield surfing. I don't even like shield surfing.
Yeah,
it's fucking weird.
I mean,
I do it for the couple of Korok puzzles that I need to do it for, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Tears has more of that kind of like creative prompts, like, hey, build something and then go do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's something telling to me in that, like, you watch all of those videos when Breath of the Wild was coming out, like, wow, this game is sort of bringing out the peak of human ingenuity. And then you see all of these videos that are like, with all of the stuff that you can build in Tears of the Kingdom, and like a lot of them are using it to torture the Koroks. And I'm like, there's something deeply wrong with human beings just inherently.
Hayao Miyazaki, I strongly feel like this is an affront to humanity.
If Breath of the Wild kind of has those Animal Crossing elements, this feels like it was heavily inspired. Or if Breath of the Wild is heavily inspired by Skyrim, has Animal Crossing elements, I feel like this was heavily inspired by like Minecraft.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like the creative mode and like building, or even Fortnite. I've never played. Because you're in that more guided environment with like clear objectives, and it's not just like pure sandbox, but they've built you an incredible sandbox to do it all in, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I'm sort of talking down on it compared to Breath of the Wild, but like, it's fucking masterpiece S tier, except nothing less.
I mean, there's just novelty in the fact that, like, I will play every Zelda game till the end of time, no matter what. But if you just made Zelda games like, here's Breath of the Wild and here's an entirely new map, I'll give you $60 for that. They're like, that baseline is good enough to be a new video game for me that I will play and fucking love. And Tears of the Kingdom is like, okay, so here's a new Hyrule, and also here's a new Hyrule, and then here's a new one, and you could do a bunch of cool shit. So like, theoretically, I'm like, yes.
They completely could have gotten away with keeping basically all of the systems of Breath of the Wild, but also we have the depths and we have the sky, and that's our game, and there's a new narrative.
Also weapon degradation, good. Actually, great mechanic. Yeah, totally. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I will not suffer opinions otherwise. If you
people being like, why do I have a hunger meter in this video game? And it's just like, shut up
and eat, you idiot. Like,
it's
make chicken.
It's to do the things like, so I think that Breath of the Wild could have more things like the weapon breaking system, because what that does is it emphasizes the need for creative problem solving and not just fucking swinging your best sword at them. Like,
yes,
what is the best way to take out this enemy so that you don't break everything? And maybe you go find some fucking Koroks and get some more bag slots, dude, so that you're not just fucking working with like 8 swords.
You people who 30. Just save all of the cool weapons and never use them, like,
that's me, to be honest. I just always am using like a fucking bokoblin skeleton arm
typically, but like, there's got to be a point where you're just like, all right, it's I'm fighting a Lionel, we need to up the ante here, so I can use one of these. I'm
gonna use one of their bows that shites 5 bomb arrows at a time. Shoot him in the fucking face.
I'm simply not fighting the Lionel. I will fight Ganon, but I am fucking with the force of nature.
I need to fucking upgrade my barbarian gear, bro, and I need his guts to do it.
So true.
That to me is like the peak of that game design. I fucking love. Upgrading all the gear and everything that it takes to do that.
There's a real monster hunter about it all, and I'm a huge monster hunter guy.
Good franchise.
Wonderful.
I want to go play Minish Cap now.
Yeah, word. I'm probably going to play Breath of the Wild. You know what I mean?
Fuck yeah.
I do. Fucking rock over London, rock on Chicago, Nintendo Wii. We would like to pray.